Levi's Vintage Clothing, they just dropped their Spring-Summer 22 collection in the lookbook that accompanies it. And I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what to make of it. And right, in case you're new here, Levi's Vintage Clothing is the sub-brand of Levi Strauss & Co. that build their collection around a part of the long or very long history of Levi's the brand. The last few seasons we've had collections built around trashy B movies from the 50s, then we had, before that then there was the Manchester rave scene, and before that there was the Louisville punk scene. So I mean, pretty diverse. And when I was looking at the other collections, especially the 80s punk scene and the Manchester rave scene, I could really tell that Levi's was trying to open things up, trying to attract a younger audience. They were taking what was going on in today's fashion and referencing where today's fashion was coming from in the context of what was going on with Levi's at the time, if that makes sense. For example, really heavily washed, big, wide, 90s style pants were really the thing. And so Levi's were like, okay, let's look at the 90s in Manchester, the whole rave culture around that, and let's use that part of our history to build the collection upon. Which is really good and really smart because, I mean, the history of Levi's, it didn't stop in the 60s. With the whole 50s B movie, that felt a little bit more like the old Levi's Vintage Clothing. With the one difference that I felt they were having really a lot of fun with it. They did what they always do. They took the fashion of the time and they built the collection around that with the context of these B movies. So the reference pieces weren't a one-to-one recreation. They were stylized, they were overdone, they were over the top, which was really in keeping with these kind of trashy horror thriller movies that were around then. It worked with the narrative of the collection. And I'm going to say what I always say around about now in these Levi's Vintage Clothing videos. An essential part of the collections, it's always the lookbook, because an essential part of the collections is that story, is that narrative. And these lookbooks that accompany the collections, they serve to illustrate that narrative. They give context to the clothing, and with that context comes an extra depth of the pieces. I think this is just one of the real true strengths of Levi's Vintage Clothing as a brand. But this time around, looking at the images from the lookbook, I really feel there's something missing. Or maybe I'm missing something, but either there's that hook missing that really engages me with the collection. But okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's have a look at the story that Levi's is telling through this spring-summer collection. This time around they take us back to the 60s. Not the whole hippie flower power movement. They did that before, like, oh god, what, 4 or 5 years ago? But instead they look at the sort of burgeoning environmentalist movement. Now this started in college campuses all across the Midwest in the USA. It went quite hand in hand with the anti-war protests, and there was a growing realization that there was an environmental crisis. So the students started to organize environmental awareness teach-ins, protests. They began to promote a more sustainable approach to consumerism. Sounds pretty familiar, right? Well, baby boomers, or would that be Generation X? They were at it first, which actually, with the context of history, is a little bit ironic. But anyway, that's not really very important. What else is important? The collection is called Project Survival, which, yes, that does sound like a pretty trashy reality TV show, but it was actually an environmentalist group or environmentalist movement that came out of Northwestern University, sorry. And it's a pretty mixed bag of archival references. It's a mishmash, a mix-up of denim, of pants, of tops, all in very washed out, faded colors with with some stripes thrown in there, some print patterns, and just a couple of crazy pieces along with that, which actually fits the idea super well. I mean, this was just a bunch of students coming together for this, right? This wasn't a cultural movement or a countercultural movement that Levi's was referencing here. The reality would have been a mix and match of a bunch of different pieces with a good bit of DIY thrown in there. Perfect example of this is this 1966 501 that's been modified into a pair of flares by inserting that triangular piece of fabric down the outer seam. Or maybe this smog. I mean, this has definitely got some pretty kind of military vibes going on, which speaks to the popularity of sort of army surplus, or maybe vets coming back from Vietnam at the time. That was really sort of, that was a big thing in the 60s and the 70s. This one's been hippied up a little bit by having a print that kind of looks like embroidery of flowers going around the bottom. So yeah, those are the pieces that really tie into the narrative in a very obvious way. But I have to say that my favorite pieces in the collection are the ones that are more subtle. And that's just because I've never seen them before. I mean, some of these bits must have been found pretty deep down in the Levi's archive. Like this here orange tab jacket. I thought that Levi stuck hand warmer pockets on their jackets in the 80s. Turns out I was wrong. I mean, yeah, it is kind of type 3-ish, but it's got a little bit more in common with the Wrangler jackets of the time, right? And then there's this hooded bomber thing. I mean, it's kind of trashy, right? But I mean that in the best possible sense. I really appreciate the trashy look if it's done right. And this works extremely well for this collection in this context. This bomber with the weird pockets, same thing. And this really does go through the entire collection. Really, this collection is so well curated. That's the true strength of what I'm seeing here, which is maybe the point that I'm having difficulties with. In the past, that narrative, the story behind the pieces that you're seeing that made up the collection, they worked in tandem. LVC used those lookbooks as a vehicle to drive this narrative. As I said, the images give context, and that context gives depth to the garments. And now I just feel that the pieces have to carry the lookbook. Actually, just thinking about it, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm missing some famous picture that everybody else knows that would really be the hook that got me into this story. As it stands, it doesn't hold together. The models are in the woods, carrying a stick. Then they're outside some, I don't know, high-rise building somewhere. Then they're in a classroom. Okay, actually, yeah, to be fair, this is starting to make sense the more I just talk over with you guys. Yeah, the students, yeah, they were in university. They probably did go off in the woods to discuss this stuff. They had teach-ins in the classrooms to raise awareness and talk about the problems, and they probably did go off to make signs and go to some faceless corporate headquarters somewhere to protest whatever faceless corporate horrible things that the people in those buildings were doing. So yeah, maybe, perhaps, probably this is an accurate depiction of what was happening at this time. But either way, I still think that it's the pieces that are the strong part of this collection, which, I mean, for any other brand apart from maybe RRL would be all fine and good. But for LVC, they've built a whole brand around storytelling. And a big part of that storytelling, the main part of that storytelling, is the lookbook. And this time around, I'm just not engaged. But that's fine. I'm very, very much engaged with some of the pieces. Some of these pieces I found absolutely fascinating. There is one thing that really gives me pause for thought, and that is the conspicuous lack of anything raw at all in the collection. There are some really, really amazing washes. Levi's vintage clothing seems to be getting very, very good at that. But I would have thought there would have been some raw pieces that just floated in there. It could be that the raw stuff has become kind of a core staple They seem to have cut down their 501 lineup to the bare minimum. So I think they've got the 37, the 47, the 54 and the 55. And I couldn't find any raw denim jackets, not a type 1, not a type 2, not a type 3, anywhere. That I really do find a bit tragic. Okay, to bring this together, to sum this up, I really do love some of the pieces, a lot of the pieces, most of the pieces that go in to make up this collection. There really are some true gems in there. The curatorship around this is as strong as it's ever been. And in fact, it could be considered the strongest it's ever been because of the diverseness. Diverseness? Is that a word? Diverseness? It's a word now, because of the diverseness of the pieces that make up this collection. And with that, they really can do what they've been doing the last few seasons. They can open this up to a wider audience while paying lip service to us grumpy folks that miss the good old days. But yeah, the lookbook images don't tell me much of anything at all. And since the harmony between the pieces that make up the collection and the story that they're trying to tell through these pieces, since that harmony is so important, so essential to Levi's vintage clothing as a brand, I'm really left feeling that there's a big part of this missing. And also, speaking of big parts that are missing, Levi's, where's the raw stuff? But anyway, something very, very important to remember, and something that I really like Levi's to listen to. I really, really want this jacket. Right, that's my 2 cents on this. But as always, I'm very curious about what you guys have to say about this. So just let's get a conversation started in the comments below. And while you're on your way down there, you know what's coming. You're going to be passing the like button. You're going to be passing that subscribe button. If you've liked the video, give it a thumbs up. That's very, very appreciated. And if you're into denim, if you're into raw denim, if you're into quality menswear, then just hit that subscribe button, because that's pretty much what this channel is all about. And that just leaves me to say, guys, as always, I hope everyone is happy and healthy out there. Hope you're taking care of each other. Hope you're taking care of yourselves. And I'm going to see you in the next video.